I'm seeing in the chat some new people. Just a very warm welcome to all of you. Please consider making this one of your spiritual homes and returning again and again. So I'm Mushim, Patricia Ikeda. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am on unceded land of the Confederated Villages of the Lishan Ohlone, more conventionally known as Oakland, California. The background that you see, I have permission to use, and it is of a gallery in the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. I really love this image. I thought the photographer did a great job of getting a great angle to make it a virtual background. So hope that you enjoy it. And I am a core teacher at Issei Meditation Center. I was very pleased to be asked by Sensei Williams, our Dharma teacher tonight, to lead the mindfulness meditation, which we can now begin if you like. So we'll meditate together, if this works for you, until 5 minutes after 8 p.m. Pacific time. And as always, we invite you to take care of yourself. You are the expert on your, someone who's your first time on Zoom. Okay, well, Antonio, please listen carefully. This is for you and everyone else. So we invite you to take care of yourself. If you need to go to the bathroom or hydrate yourself, have something to eat, if you need to lie down, whatever you need to do, maybe a little bit of gentle stretching, yoga, tai chi, qigong, this is your time for self-care in community, in supportive community. We understand this is a time of pandemic and global activation and stress. So really, that's the first priority, is to please practice self-care and compassion to you, because you're part of our community and we all rely on one another. So if you like, let's begin our period of meditation practice together by finding a position that's going in the direction of being stable, as comfortable as possible, without inviting sleep. Although if you do fall asleep, so many people are sleep deprived during this time. As a meditation teacher, my recommendation is take a really fabulous nap. You probably need it. So if you like, find a position that's comfortable enough, stable, centered, grounded. Again, there's no perfection. We're going in that direction in alignment with our body, mind, as it is in the present moment. So if you like, I invite you to just take a moment and check in with yourself. Are there any physical adjustments that you need to make? With spaciousness and kindness, you might ask yourself, how am I doing? What's my mood like? And simply notice and observe with kindness. And if this works for you, perhaps taking a few deep cleansing breaths. If this is uncomfortable for you in any way, you can totally skip it. So I'm going to do it, breathing in and out. Relax. And perhaps a couple more times. Closing the eyes gently, or your choice, allowing them to be open to let in some light from the room. We're practicing mindfulness meditation. That's a term in English. One out of hundreds of different methods of meditation. And this is exactly the same technique as insight meditation in English and vipassana meditation from the Theravada Buddhist tradition. It's very old. And as we settle into the posture that we've chosen, and you can feel free to switch it anytime, simply you're invited to do so consciously. And what that means is you have a little conversation in your head and you say, my leg's really hurting, or my back hurts. I think I need to shift my posture. Now I'm going to shift my posture. And we're invited to notice and observe any physical sensations that are comfortable enough. Many of us have chronic pain or a temporary pain condition that is painful. If your practice is more developed, you know how to practice with pain. If you're more of a beginner, please be kind to yourself. And you might choose to place your awareness, your attention on physical sensations that are more neutral or comfortable. What do you notice? There might be physical sensations of warmth, coolness, tingling, throbbing, contact, pressure, expansion, contraction, heaviness, lightness, and other physical sensations, body sensations. And you'll notice how simple the labels are for these sensations. Radically simple. Very important, our attitude, if possible, is one of kindness and curiosity. Like, what can I notice are physical sensations in my hands? What does the back of my right knee feel like? And please don't forget kindness to yourself. So see what you notice. If it helps you to feel safer and better, you might wish to practice some very compassionate self-touch by placing one or two hands on your heart, or a hand on your heart and another hand on your belly. You might even try a hand on the back of the neck. That can be very soothing. And once again, if it's accessible to you, noticing physical sensations. Thoughts and emotions arise, they come and go. They're not permanent. As long as we're alive, however, awareness of the body, if we're conscious, and if it works for you, awareness of specifically of physical sensations of the breath are anchors, they're constant. I think of them as a nest, and my meditation is like a bird that keeps coming back to its wonderful nest. So you can stay with noticing any physical sensations that are comfortable enough for you to observe. Or you might switch to specifically noting where you feel it in your body as you breathe in and out in a natural rhythm. So these are not breathing exercises. The breath is natural. Where do you feel it? In your tummy area, in your chest, in your nose, maybe somewhere else. Breathing in, noticing physical sensations of the in-breath. Breathing out, relaxing, noticing physical sensations of breathing out. And once again, notice and observe with kindness and curiosity. What's arising in my experience right now? There might be fear, sadness, joy, and many other emotions. There might be many thoughts. That's normal. And we might notice thinking is happening. We're inviting ourselves to take a little break from making stories and following stories. It can be refreshing to be very simple sometimes. And perhaps remaining in our meditative state, and if you like, shifting into a brief practice of unconditional, universal friendliness, sometimes called loving kindness. There are 102 of us, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and multiracial folks, gathered together in spiritual community. We may not be in the same physical room. We can still connect to one another, and we can certainly wish each other well. So in any way that you like, extending these wishes of goodwill towards ourselves and everyone who is gathered in Sangha, in spiritual community tonight. May I be safe and protected from all harm, physical harm and mental harm. May I enjoy well-being, living in health and strength as much as possible. Some of us have chronic illnesses, so hopefully we can still have moments of well-being. May I be peaceful and truly happy, living with joy and with ease. And now, if you like, turning these well wishes and generating them outward in all directions towards everyone. There are now 103 of us in this Zoom meeting. To all members of the Sangha gathered here tonight to hear the teachings, may you be safe and protected from all harm, inner and outer. May you be as strong and healthy as possible, with moments of well-being if you are ill. May you know peace and true happiness. May you know the causes of happiness. May you live with joy. May you live with ease. And in a moment, we'll shift and I'll invite the bell of mindfulness 3 times to bring to a close this period of mindfulness meditation, probably in a stationary posture, either seated or lying down, after which we'll have a 5-minute break. But we're not there yet. We know that we practice not only for ourselves, we do practice for ourselves, and we also practice for others, for the benefit of the many beings. May we be protectors to those without protection, and leaders to those who journey. May we be a boat, a bridge, and a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. Thank you for your beautiful practice benefiting all of us. We'll now have a break.
Duncan Ryūken Williams is a Soto Zen Buddhist priest. He has served as a Buddhist chaplain at Harvard University. Currently, he is a professor and the chair of USC School of Religion and director of the USC Shinto Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Culture in Los Angeles. He is also the author of the LA Times bestseller, American Sutra, A Story of Faith and Freedom in the Second World War, about Buddhism and the World War II Japanese-American internment. If you are not aware, tomorrow also is the Day of Remembrance, which commemorates that day of the beginning of internment, as well as the book, The Other Side of Zen, A Social History of Soto Zen Buddhism in Tokugawa, Japan, and editor of 7 books. He is also the national co-chair of Tsuru for Solidarity, a Japanese-American racial justice organization. And with that, I would like to welcome Reverend Duncan Ryūken Williams.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to chant in the Japanese way. We call it Shiguseigan, the 4 Bodhisattva vows. Shujo muhen seigan do Monno mujin seigan dan Omon muryo seigan gaku Butsu do mujo seigan ryo. Well, sentient beings are innumerable. We vow to liberate all. We have so many bonno, delusions, and yet we vow to overcome them all. The homo, the Dharma is boundless, and yet we vow to master it. And the Buddhist way is incalculable, and yet we vow to attain it. This is the meaning of the first the chant we do. And well, I hope today I can share something connected to these words, and but from the perspective of what Evan mentioned a moment ago. Tomorrow is the day of remembrance in the Japanese American community, and in my temple in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, and many other historic Japanese American temples. This time of the year, we recall what happened to the Japanese American community back in World War II. We remember at our temples the efforts of the ancestors, the temple members and Dharma ancestors who maintained the Buddhist practice through many, many difficult moments, including the forced removal and incarceration of World War II. And so if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen and hope to give some kind of presentation on this topic. And so this is I'm going to start with a couple of maps. This is a map of where almost 125,000 persons of Japanese ancestry spent many of the years of World War II. Most people, I think, know that this community, which was in 1941, right after Pearl Harbor, the largest Buddhist community in the United States, the Japanese American community, they found themselves not only on the basis of race, but their religion, the majority Buddhist community targeted for their background for this wartime incarceration. I'm going to today, for the Dharma Talk, mention a few important Dharma concepts or Buddhist words that I hope will structure what I hope to share with you. And the first word is this word goen. In Japanese, it means like when you say "en ga nai desu ne," or like "en ga arimashita ne," like it just means like, oh, there was some kind of good linkage or connection to a person or a place or a situation. But it actually comes from the much deeper meaning from Buddhism. From, in the Sanskrit, we would say pratitya samutpada, or this kind of interlinking, a kind of mysterious karmic interlinking of everything. And so I want to start today to tell you a little bit about this question of what happened to Japanese American Buddhists during World War II and how that might be relevant for us today, by telling you a little bit about how I mysteriously, what karmic conditions connected me to this history. This page that you can see in Japanese is a diary by Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi. He was a very famous Buddhist priest who served LA temples, San Francisco, Gardena Buddhist Temple, and his son was my professor when I was in graduate school. And his son, who was my professor of Buddhist studies, he suddenly passed away. And when I was trying to help the family to clean his office and do some things to help with this sudden situation, I planned for the funeral. I did different things. But one of the things was I was cleaning the office and I found this piece of paper. It was actually a series of sheets of paper, which were the Dharma talks and diary that Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi put together during his time of incarceration in a camp called Manzanar. It was one of the camps here in California that nearly 10,000 persons of Japanese ancestry spent the war years. And this is a picture of him at the Hana Matsuri. It means a flower festival, but in the Japanese tradition, that's the Buddha's birthday that's celebrated in April. And I translated this diary for the family, and I learned so much about what a Buddhist priest, a fellow Buddhist priest, in such a situation would have to say to people to help in a moment of dislocation, in a moment of loss. What will he say? And I'm going to give some hints about this a little bit later. But this was my goen, or karmic connection to this history, because I didn't grow up in the United States. I was born and raised in Japan, and I was 17 years old when I came to first time to America, and I went to a small town called Portland, Oregon. And there, I went to a college called Reed College, and my English wasn't so good, but somehow they accepted me. And there in Portland, I came to learn a story about what is America. It was a story, our rival college across the river was called Lewis and Clark. There's an NBA basketball team called the Portland Trail Blazers. We came to learn a history of the United States that was about people moving ever westward, trailblazing ever westward, supposedly bringing some kind of civilization, Christianity, European culture to a land that was supposedly devoid of that. We all know, I think this is completely, false. But the idea that there was an uncivilized territory to continuously move and occupy ever westward. This was my image of what is America. And when I was before my current job, I was a professor at UC Berkeley, and I came to learn that the university was named after an Anglican bishop called George Berkeley, the British poet and philosopher and bishop. And he has a poem that I think nicely captures this vision of America. One stanza reads, "Westward the course of empire takes its way. The first 4 acts already past. A 5th shall close the drama with the day. Time's noblest offspring is the last." So this idea of America as a land that is ordained by God in a manifest destiny to be civilized, an old world to be left behind for a new white and Christian America. This was one kind of story I received of America. But when I began to translate Buddhist priest, this is maybe some 20 years ago now, I was starting to translate a lot of Buddhist priest diaries from World War II, from the internment camps. And one of the poems I came across by a Buddhist priest who had been based here in Los Angeles before the war, a Rinzai Zen Buddhist priest called Nyogen Senzaki, he has a different idea about where he is. And it always occurred to me, you know, as an immigrant from Japan to this country, that westward story doesn't fit so much Asian American people's histories. It doesn't fit so much people who are enslaved from Africa. It doesn't fit so much Central American people moving north. There's a different directions of the American story. And Nyogen Senzaki wrote in 1942, as he was living in a horse stall east of where I live now in Santa Anita. He was in a horse stall. It's still there, horse race track. And he was moved, like many other people, suddenly to these type of locations. And he writes to his community back in Los Angeles. He had a multi-ethnic community, some Latinx members, some Caucasian members, of course, Japanese national Japanese Americans. And he wrote to the members who didn't have to go to this horse stall camp about the fact that he was going to go to a place called Heart Mountain, Wyoming, one of these permanent wartime camps. And he wrote this poem in contrast to what George Berkeley wrote. He said, "This morning, the winding train like a big black snake takes us as far as Wyoming. The current of Buddhist thought always runs eastward. This policy may support the tendency of the teaching. Who knows?" It's a little bit cheeky as a poem, but he is saying something that has a deep Buddhist idea. This idea of Buddhist thought always runs eastward. In Japanese, we call it Bukkyo Tozen. And Japanese Buddhists in the 8th century believed, for example, that Buddhism began in India, but eventually moved eastward through China and Korea, and finally came to this most easternmost outpost of Asia, a place called Japan. It is based on the prophecy that the Buddha gave that after he died, although he would not be physically present, his Dharma would remain, the teachings would remain, and that he prophesied, move eastward. And so Senzaki in 1942 is referring to that idea that the Dharma moves inexorably eastward. Why? Because he's moving from east of LA to Wyoming, and the Dharma seed he's going to carry over there. Interesting, different vision of what is America. So that's where I want to start when I think about what is the state of American Buddhism today, who is involved in the building of it, and what are the frames that we use to think about it. One of the most surprising things that I learned when I was doing my research at the National Archives, declassifying tens of thousands of documents about Buddhist priests, their FBI records, investigations taken by the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army G2, and the FBI. They had temples, Buddhist temples, under surveillance for years prior to the Pearl Harbor attack. They had registries of Buddhist priests as threats to national security. And the very first person picked up after the Pearl Harbor attack was Reverend Gikyo Kuchiba, the head Buddhist priest of the Honpa Honganji Buddhist Temple, the largest Buddhist temple in Honolulu. And I always thought that was very strange. Your war, why, maybe consular, if you're worried about fifth column elements and subversion and so forth, why were the Buddhist priests the first people picked up? Next Buddhist priest, second person picked up before the smoke had cleared at Pearl Harbor, even before martial law had been declared. Bishop Kuchiba, a Buddhist priest from Taiheiji Temple, one of the Soto Zen temples that my lineage is associated with. So somehow Buddhist priests were considered at that time in America dangerous to the existence of America. And this is just one example of Reverend Miyamoto, Jodoshu priest, as FBI records and a warrant of arrest and so forth. And you can see he's placed in a group called Group A, individuals believed to be most dangerous who in all probability should be interned in event of war. In other words, even though Pearl Harbor was a so-called surprise attack, people had been placed for many years prior on lists, registries that placed Shinto priests and Buddhist priests, but not Christian pastors of Japanese heritage, in a group called most dangerous. Right. So I want to talk a little bit about, today I feel like Buddhism is not so, it's more accepted in American life, but not so many generations ago. That was certainly not the case. Buddhism was not seen to be in accord with American identity and American, even like security. It was considered a threat to America. And this comes, of course, much earlier. The first large Buddhist group in America were before the Japanese, the Chinese American community. And at that time, the slur word that was used, the heathen Chinese, this was the word used in the period leading up to the first immigration law that was a federal piece of legislation, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. That was the first law that said the United States government is not going to permit one group of people to target one group as unwelcome in America. And they used the word Chinese to talk about a racially unassimilable group, and the word heathen to refer to a religious group. They were, primarily Buddha-Taoist group, as unable to meld into America. And it was talk before that legislation passed of a Chinese wall that should be built symbolically, on the Pacific. They would talk about this invasion of these Oriental people, establishing a heathen Chinese despotism in San Francisco. You can see in that pamphlet. This kind of idea was based on the notion of the yellow peril. This had its precedents, of course, in Europe as well. And you can see this, our Harper's Weekly bit, this came out after that Chinese Exclusion Act was already passed, still fear of now the Japanese coming in large numbers. And you can see in this image the idea of some kind of beautiful territory lit by the cross of Christ, being threatened by these ominous clouds, dark black clouds in the distance with the Buddha in it. And that same image was used during World War II, 1943. You can see the other image, a military tank, a samurai figure, a Buddha being the face of it. So this idea that Buddhism, the Orientals coming to invade, we have many of this kind of thing, language about exclusion based on race and religion, even today, on the southern border, around race, Muslim ban, around religion. These themes of, is America essentially a white Christian nation, or is it a multi-ethnic and religiously plural and free nation? This is a long-standing theme that Buddhists in America have had to contend with from the very earliest history of our faith tradition in this country. And I now want to talk about World War II. Tomorrow is the anniversary, Day of Remembrance, as we call it, of Executive Order 9066, the presidential executive order issued by President Roosevelt that declared that the Army could move anyone in the Western Defense Command Zone, the entirety of the Pacific Coast, anyone that they deemed a threat to national security from that area. And in fact, you can see little kids and infirm grandmother, like they didn't care if you were in fact a threat to national security. They removed everyone of Japanese ancestry from this zone. As somebody who is mixed, heritage, Japanese background, I wondered also about how about mixed race people? Did they have to go too? And one of the orphanages here in my area, Los Angeles, run by the Maryknoll Church, they had a lot, at that time, there was an anti-miscegenation law, these marriage statutes that prohibited interracial marriages and mixing, and in California as well. And so at that time, it was not so acceptable to have these kind of families. And sometimes children were abandoned. And so there was an orphanage in Los Angeles that had many children of mixed Japanese heritage. And when the architect of this executive order, Colonel Carl Bendiston and John DeWitt, but Bendiston went to that orphanage, was asked by the orphanage director, do these mixed race kids also need to go? And his answer was, if they have a single drop of Japanese blood in them, I want them in camp. So that's what it was. Basically an ethnic cleansing of the Pacific Coast of anyone with even a single drop of Japanese blood. They would go to places like this, Puyallup. If you lived in Seattle, this is located still there, the fairgrounds, 30 miles south of Seattle. And when you got to these assembly centers, as they were euphemistically called, just like Reverend Nyogen Senzaki, who went to the Santa Anita Assembly Center for people here in LA area, you had between a week and 10 days notice to sell your business. If you're a college student, to disenroll, your life was suddenly uprooted. And they told you could take what you could carry. So that often meant like a single suitcase. You ended up in a situation like this. And as you entered, they would have rules about contraband, what would be permissible and not. Expected were things like guns and even like cameras. They thought that the Japanese were going to spy or something. But the other main thing that they searched and confiscated was if you had like a Buddhist sutra, anything, a book written in Japanese, that was considered dangerous. And the only exception to that rule was if you had a English-Japanese dictionary and a Christian Bible. If those were had Japanese, characters, that was considered okay. But if you had a book of haiku poetry or Buddhist sutra, that was to be confiscated, a danger to national security. So what was the message people were receiving? They were being told that America's norm about what was secure and loyal was based on this idea of, sometimes scholars call it Anglo-Protestant normativity. The norm is Anglo, both in the sense of whiteness, but also in the sense of English only, and Protestantism. And that if you were of a different faith, if you are of a different, that was not the norm. And so Buddhist families took that information in, but not all of them believed what the government was telling them. This family in the Portland Assembly Center, this is the daughter of Reverend Tansai Terakawa, who unfortunately passed away during his time in camp. But his daughter Hiroko is playing checkers with her friend Lillian Hayashi. And in this Buddhist family, you can see they put up a picture of the Buddha and a big American flag on their wall. They try to make their horse stall as livable as possible. You can see they try to make a decent situation as best they could of what they had brought with them. But the other thing they wanted to do beyond just the trying to settle in for a time, indefinite, they're going to some other camp for a length indeterminate, but they were making a claim about the idea that just because you're a Buddhist doesn't mean you can't be American. And it's, to me, a very powerful statement at a time when all the pressure was on to denounce their faith and convert to Christianity. And as they were moved to the big camps, the Buddhist teaching that I think they relied on most was this idea in Japanese we call hoben. It's a translation of the Sanskrit upaya. Usually scholars translate it skillful means, but I never know what that means. So I translate skillful adaptation. The Buddha taught that when you share the Dharma, you should do it in such a manner that is appropriate for time and place, and you adapt the Dharma accordingly. And so people, I call it kuku, what was available. In my tradition, my lineage founder, Zen Master Dogen, he used to talk about in the monastery, the cooks. You should know what is available in the monastic kitchen, have a good understanding of an inventory, and then don't make a meal for pleasuring yourself, but for the spiritual sustenance, physical sustenance, and spiritual sustenance of all the trainees in the monastery. That's the purpose of training in the Zen Kitchen. And of course, this is a type of metaphor, right? The kitchen is really ourselves. In meditation, we try to take an inventory of who am I? And sometimes some of our ingredients are wonderful and maybe some are not so good. But the difference between a regular cook and a Buddhist cook is we're supposed to even take the ingredients that are not so good and transform it into something that is worthy, not just for ourselves, but everyone else. That's to do cooking in the Zen Buddhist way. And so people in these camps, they made altars out of found wood in the desert. In the mess halls that they ate in, they had crates with transporting vegetables and fruit. They took that and made beautiful Buddhist altars so they could have a place for the Sangha to gather. In one of the camps, one of the Soto Zen priests, my lineage priest, was in a high security camp, and they had a ration of one piece of fruit per week. He didn't have time to get his, we call it ojuzu, like a prayer beads. So he made it out of the peach pits that were available. from saving up over the weeks. Here in Los Angeles, in Little Tokyo, we have a temple called Koya-san, Shingon Buddhist Temple, and Reverend Takashi Setsu, his son Ed, is still there. And, well, Reverend Takashi, when he went to one of the camps, he wrote in his recollections how he would be so annoyed because at night the searchlights would be on, the guards would stop him whenever he went to the bathroom, and he couldn't go to sleep because the searchlights would keep on coming through the barracks. But then he one day said, I returned to the quiet and supreme life of walking alongside Kobo Daishi, that's the founder of Shingon Buddhism. As if trying to practice meditation under the moonlit pine, I've been viewing the guards' searchlights as Komyo, Buddha's sacred light, and have been practicing Komyo meditation together with Kobo Daishi. In that tradition of Buddhism, the moon is a kind of, I should say, metaphor of enlightenment. And you suffuse your mind with the moon traversing through it. And instead of seeing the guard searchlight as a hindrance, he decided to use it to aid his own meditation practice. This, sometimes we call it, in English, we translate something like lotus flower that can blossom above the muddy waters. My colleague at my temple, Zen Shuji in Little Tokyo, Abbot Kojima, Reverend Kojima, after he read my book, American Sutra, he painted this for me. You can see a lotus flower, you can see the muddy waters, a pond, a little bit in the shape of North America, the United States, and then the barbed wire blossoming above it. And this is a Buddhist teaching that is, very widely known and usually interpreted to mean we are in the world, but not of it. We rise above it. We do our practice to try to transcend. And to kind of, we call it saha, like dusty world, muddy world, like we kind of try to move beyond it. But actually, what I learned how people back, our Dharma, ancestors practice was that they said, let us take the difficulties, the suffering of loss and dislocation, family separation, and use that to feed our practice. Because as one Buddhist priest sermon said, he was talking about the fact that he was arrested on the day of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, and that's a Sunday. And he was in his robes, and the FBI came and took him, and he didn't even have a chance to go back home to get other clothes. And he was giving a sermon, a Dharma Talk in April, Hana Matsuri, the flower festival, which is always in April of 1942. So 4 months, he mentioned the fact that he hadn't had a change of clothes and how dirty his robes had become. But he said, when we think of the Buddha and when we think of how to become free, we look at these dirty robes and we know that, in fact, a lotus flower can't blossom in pristine or sterile water. It needs the mud to have the nutrition to grow. So that's the teaching of our Dharma ancestors, how they persisted with their Buddhist practice. I worry I went too long, so I'm just looking at that time. I'm going to try to end with one more slide, if I may. This one. Because I want to talk about how we take those lessons from our Dharma ancestors and apply it for today. One of the ideas, I think many of you may have heard of this Japanese way of repair called kintsugi. If you read the character, kin means gold and tsugu comes, Tsugi comes from the verb tsugu, means to join. And when we have, it comes from the pottery tradition in Japan, or ceramics. When you break, for example, a favorite plate or teacup or something like that, we have a tradition of using a kind of lacquer resin to join the shards and the broken pieces, and then adding gold, adorning with gold, the king, to repair it. And it has to do with a kind of mindset that says we are already, broken. Shōro byoshi. Everybody who comes into being, we are born, grow old, become ill, we die. Everyone's already broken. Teacups already broken. But we renew, we repair, and by so doing, honor the history of that brokenness and not hide it, but in fact adorn it. And so, to me, this is what Day of Remembrance means. It's a way to remember our Dharma ancestors, our Buddhist history in America. There are many histories. Today I share one with you that comes from my tradition. But we can, I think, draw on our Buddhist teachings to do some of that repair work, healing work, and in many ways, find ways to do the deep work. Ta-Nehisi Coates once said about reparations that it's not just about financial recompense, but it's a national reckoning that requires a deep spiritual renewal. And I think that work of remembering America's past that appears in the present, but needs to be healed, needs to be repaired. This is something that I think we can, if we listen carefully to our Dharma ancestors, have some hints. So with that, I just wanted to share a few of those teachings that I learned from these ancestors, and hope if you have any thoughts or questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. So thank you so much. Yes, I hope there are, many of the anecdotes I mentioned. Some are in the book, some are not. But I tried my best to capture many of the stories of Buddhist families and Buddhist teachers trying their best to persist and survive that period. And so yes, that was my effort to try to record those stories. I interviewed about 120 camp survivors. This is about 20 years ago, when many of them were still, still with us. And I wanted to make sure this part of American Buddhist history was not forgotten. Thank you for that question. And let me share this slide again, if that's okay. This one. Some Japanese American people, some camp survivors and descendants formed a group called Tsuru for Solidarity back in March 30 of 2019. And Satsuki, one of the co-founders, she was a small child in camp, and her father was taken by the FBI, and so recalling some of those experiences of family separation, indefinite incarceration, unjust deportation, she noted how so few people stood up back then for what was happening to 125,000 people's lives being uprooted. Very few people objected, no politicians were standing up for them, no protests or anything like that. So when she heard about kids of her, when she was in camp, her age, being separated from their families at the border, on the southern border, Central American asylum seekers being denied that opportunity to seek asylum properly, a deterrence policy of separating children from their families. She got together with many other people making Japanese origami paper cranes to put on these walls of ICE and Border Patrol places. Initially, they went to this place, one of the three big family residential centers. There's two in Texas, one in Pennsylvania. The one in Delhi is still the largest one, but it's right near one of the former World War II internment camps called Crystal City, a family camp in Texas. And so this group went and they made 10,000 cranes around and they actually made more than 10,000. The original idea was to make 10,000 cranes. And I found out one of the other co-founders, she made color copies of the front cover of my book and made some cranes and put it there. And so for that reason, I was a little bit, to be honest, ignorant of what was happening on the southern border. And so I helped to, ask my Buddhist free clergy friends from different traditions of mainly, of course, in Little Tokyo, historic Japanese American temples, Reverend Briones, who serves Honganji Temple. He's a third generation Mexican American, but serving historic Japanese American temple. He came with Reverend Kojima came, Reverend Hayashi came, and then we participated in one of the protests at a site that was back in World War II, a internment camp called Fort Sill. Still exists today as a field artillery training site. But they were intending to make that army camp and send 1,400 of the children from Delhi there, and to actually use a former World War II camp for Japanese Americans, a former place used to incarcerate and assimilate Native American peoples. Geronimo is buried there. The Apache people suffered confinement there. And so it's got this history that is interlinking many different things. And we did a Buddhist service ceremony there for all of the children who have died in Border Patrol and ICE custody. We took cranes, many Buddhist Sanghas. I asked different Sanghas to help make cranes, and everyone contributed something, and we did that kind of action. We also did some things after the passing away of George Floyd to recall his life, recall the names of people who have been a victim of this structural, white supremacist and Christian nation kind of idea that people who don't fit that get treated differentially. And so some of those camps, have this kind of unfortunate history, and continue in many ways to serve as a reminder of how we are still not overcoming fully these enduring questions about who is included, who is excluded, who belongs, who can call themselves American. And back then in World War II, I'm always strengthened by the perseverance, resilience of these Japanese American Buddhist families who I think by just persisting, they not only help, build something called American Buddhism, but they actually did something for our country about what does it mean to talk about equal treatment, due process under the law, about religious freedom. None of these aspirations and ideals of the Constitution can be, it's like Buddhist teachings, right? We have so many around wisdom and around compassion. And unless we enact them, they're just words in the sutra. They become real when we enact and manifest and actualize the same thing, religious freedom. People have to just manifest it. Even, as I was mentioning, when you're told you don't belong. And so this is, I think, the courage of our ancestors. And we have many, many ancestors in a multi-ethnic nation. And we have to, I think, learn from so many of them about how to survive, how to persist, how to enact, and build something we're for, and not just what we're against, but what we're for. And I think that's something that we fellow Buddhists might have, hopefully, something to contribute.
Everybody feel free to unmute yourselves and say good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Salamat po.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you. I love you.
Bye.
Aloha.
Amazing
Blessing.
presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Good night.
Good night.
Oyasumi nasai.